Welcome back to our study into the book of Job. We are at part number 8. There only is a few more parts to go. As I said before, I'm skipping through this to try and just get a few kernels of truth and nuggets of gold to sort of focus on. There's a lot more in it than what I've had time or have time to go into right now. This could be a series you could go on to for weeks and weeks and weeks. But I don't really want to do that. I don't think it would be appropriate right now. Last time we spoke, we talked about Job in chapter 23, verse 3, where Job said, "Oh, that I knew where I might find him." His experience had left him feeling far from God, feeling unknown to God, feeling that God didn't see what he's going through. The heavens were as brass, and he just really was taking it to heart. We then had Bildad came back with a few comments about traditions, and also some great comments about the greatness of God. So now we've got in Job replying in chapter 26, we're up to now. Job replies to Bildad. Remember, Bildad is the Treviev figure from Fiddler on the Roof, and forever I will think of Bildad as Treviev. But Job answers him, and he says to him, "Your traditions have given me no satisfaction. Your traditions have presented no answers that make sense to me. They doesn't match up with my experience. Your traditions," he goes as far to say, actually, your traditions are bankrupt. They're bereft of any value and bereft of any worth. And he's really struggling here to articulate this. You know, he's reached, I think in many ways, Job has reached his lowest point. Even through all these experiences, now his mind and his heart, his understanding and his emotions are warring against each other. And he just reaches a point where he's going like, I wish I could find God. I wish I knew where God was. And now he's saying to Bildad, your traditions are bereft of any value. But something starts to happen in Job. Something starts to change in Job. In chapter 26, verse 7, it says, "He stretches out the north over empty space. He hangs the earth on nothingness." Now Job's coming back to his belief that God is the God of all creation. He's coming back to that idea that he knew and he believed in his heart that God is awesome in power and majesty, that God has created all things. He's coming back to what he believes in his heart of hearts. Amidst all those things that were experienced and he was confusion and debating over, at his heart is still that kernel of truth that God is still God, that God is still awesome, that God is still worthy to be worshipped and obeyed. He's still got that love for God, that fear of God, that respect for God. See, it says the word north here, but the word north is the word ziphon or zaphon. And that's the Hebrew word which means north, but that could be, some commentators suggest, a transliteration of the word for the mountain where Baal lived. Remember Baal, one of the gods of the ancient world, who was in this whole region would have been revered and worshipped. So Job is maybe suggesting here that even this place that people revere as holy for that God that God can't even take credit for it, because realistically the God of all creation has created all things. There's the God who is beyond those things, beyond those there mere fairy tales, mythology that people follow after. This is the God who created all things. His heart after God is expanding his mind, and he's starting to broaden what he's experiencing. Hang on, let me get back to the truth. I believe God is still good. I believe God's still big. I believe God's still mighty. I believe God can do all things. See, that's at the heart of who Job is. That's at the heart of his experience. At the early part of this book, we talked about how he revered God, how he feared God, how he went to great lengths to honor God and to protect his kids in their relationship with God and in their experience with God. and how that was central and pivotal to who he is. Even his trading with other people, they knew that he was an honourable man, that he was a righteous man, and that he was upright and blameless before God. So therefore they knew that they could trust his measurements, they could trust his pricing, they could trust his opinion. So pivotal and at the centre of who he was his relationship with God and his reverence for God and his fear of God. And it's coming to the heart again. It's coming to the surface again. After all the waves have crashed upon him, have come in from one side after another, after his experience has boiled over, at the heart he knows, at his heart he knows that God is still God, that God is still worthy to be worshipped and worthy to be honoured. Even we go on there, he talks about verse 11, the pillars of heaven tremble and are astonished at his rebuke, God's rebuke. Verse 12, he stirs up the sea with his power, and by his understanding he breaks up the storm. Again, stirs up the sea, hearkening back to this idea of a mythological creature, Leviathan, which it speaks of in the book, Rahab, which is another one. And this is a spirit or a creature of chaos that stirs up the seas, stirs up the waters, that brings about destruction, that brings about unhappiness and experiences and things on the sea and in that region. And here Job's saying that even God of all creation is power over those things, the stirring of the seas and the chaos all around us. And actually that one line, by his understanding he breaks up the storm. Can't you hear the master when he was on the boat and the disciples were saying to him, are you not worried that our ship's going under? And he got up and he spoke to the storm and he said, peace, be still. Here Job saying the same thing. By his understanding, he breaks up the storm. See, his heart is still beating after the master. His heart is still beating for God. I know that there's a God out there. My experience has been bad. I don't know what's going on. I'm struggling to understand it. But still, there's a God who's worthy of worship. Still, there's a God who's worthy to be worshipped and adored. The next section we come into now is chapter 27 to 31. And Job lays down his final case. As it were, he's come to the stand and he's going to give his final defence. You're going to see that courtroom as he walks up to the stand and he puts his hand on the Bible and he raises his right hand and promises, I promise to give, to tell the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth. He actually starts out here in chapter 27 by saying in verse number 2, as God lives, who has taken away my justice? As God lives, that oath that we hear often in scriptures, as God lives, as the Lord liveth, as God is my judge. That's the phrases we hear and we read often in scripture and even in other places. And he's taken his oath. I promise to tell the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth. But he's got a caveat. Did you hear the caveat there, verse 2? Who has taken away my justice. Even as he's taking the stand to give his final defence, and this is his final defence, as he's taking the stand, even at this moment, he still sees himself as a victim. He still now identifies as a victim. He had experienced bad things. He'd gone through terrible loss, no doubt about it. He was a victim of storms and of raiders and of the work of the enemy. There's no doubt about it. He was a victim. And even his friends have given him no hope and no solace at all. And he's now gone from being a victim to now identifying as a victim. The process had started a few chapters back where he was pleading his case that God was lifting him up like a human piñata and was firing darts at him, and that he had no hope of getting justice from God. But he now identifies himself as a victim. There's a danger in that. We can be victims to circumstances. We can be victims to disease or heart problems or physical problems or political problems. We can be victims of those and merely just swept along in them and having an impact on our lives as a result of them. And that is, being a victim is. But to identify as a victim is dangerous. We've got to be very, very, very careful with this identification. How do we identify ourselves? Do we identify ourselves as victims? Our culture today prizes victimhood. It prizes someone who has been the subject of hardships as a result of someone else or something else. They look for calls to say that, oh, I am a victim of racism, or I'm a victim of abuse, or I'm a victim of neglect, or I'm a victim of this. Got to be very, very careful with these things, because as believers, we can be victim of things, but we should never identify as a victim. I don't identify as a victim because of the things I went through or I've gone through. Because at the end of the day, I identify as a child of the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. I identify as one who has been redeemed, one who has been delivered, one who's been set free. I identified no longer as a stranger and a foreigner to the Commonwealth of Israel, but now I have been brought near by his precious blood. Now I identify as an heir and joint heir with Christ. That's how I identify. And you see, whenever you identify the right way, when you identify yourself as a child of God, as an heir of righteousness, as one who is heaven bound, who has been set free, who has been delivered. See, all those things that we experience, all those things that we will go through, they will remain out there at arm's length. See, identifying as a victim will give us no hope for tomorrow. Identifying as a victim will not deliver us from being a victim. Identifying as a victim will merely keep us in a position to remain a victim. It will keep us in that place where we'll be looking ourselves for the next excuse to claim victimhood. It will keep us in that place that will be subject to those things around us, those spirits, those experiences, those natural forces that want to keep us down, that want to keep the people of God subject to the whims of this world and to the spirit of this world. But you see, whenever we identify as the children of God, as those who have been set free, those who have been redeemed from the curse of the law, those who have been glorified with him and we now sit with him in heavenly places, see, people, when we identify that way, by golly, there's not a thing that can hold us down. There's not a thing that can captivate our souls again. We have been made free, not set free. We have been made free. Thank the Lord in heaven. Glory to his name. Job here struggling. He still identifies himself as a victim. This is going to take some drastic measures. God himself is going to have to step in and interfere. But I thank God we don't have to identify as victims today. We have been set free, delivered. Praise the Lord. Job goes on, as I said, in these passages here, in these next chapters, laying down his case for how he's an innocent victim. One chapter worth noting, and one I would strongly advise reading even, chapter 28. It's worth looking at. Chapter 28, Job starts a discourse on wisdom. And it's really, really good. It's really interesting. 28 verse 1 says, "Surely there is a mine for silver and a place where gold is refined. Iron is taken from the earth and copper is smelted from ore. Man puts an end to darkness and searches out every recess for ore in the darkness and the shadow of death." See, he's talking about the man's wisdom and the wisdom of man that he sees around him. Those things that he knows and he grew up with and he's experienced. Man's genius is the intellect that puts an end to darkness, persistence that searches out every recess, curiosity that explores the unknown, vision that sees better than the falcon, courage that is better than the lions, inventiveness that creates new tools, industry that reshapes the environment, discernment that perceives the precious, and creativity that produces new alternatives. This is the manly wisdom, the wisdom of man that he sees around him and he's familiar with, that he has lived with and he's operated in. And he explores that slightly. And there's a value in it. there's value in that. But the truth is that the wisdom of this world, the wisdom in those things, has a limit. It's a shadow of true wisdom with a capital W. True wisdom that comes from God. True wisdom that is encapsulated, that is in God, that we only get whenever we have a wisdom and we have an understanding of God. That's when we start to scrape the surface of godly wisdom and of true wisdom. Real wisdom is not found in catchy proverbs. Now, I love catchy proverbs. One of the ones I've been using a lot over the last few years. When people have asked me, what do you think of that circumstance? Or what do you think of the decision to do this? What do you think of your business? Or what do you think of this family member? Or what do you think? There's a Polish proverb that says, not my monkeys and not my circus. It's good to use. It's good. It's a really good piece of wisdom. It's a really good reason to not get involved in someone else's drama and someone else's argument. And there's wisdom in that, but it's not real wisdom. The real wisdom he's talking about is not found in catchy proverbs. Job is talking about true wisdom, wisdom that comes from God. It is more concerned with the issues of life, the way that God originally constructed the whole of creation, the way God rules all of creation, and how we ultimately fit into his created order. It's more concerned with God. Real, true wisdom sees things from God's point of view. Now, reading this book, we can gain great wisdom. You see Job in his world, perfect world with his family and his kids, and then it zooms out to God's perspective. How God is in the throne of heaven, surrounded by his angels and his heavenly hosts, and the enemies there. And then it zooms back into Job and his experiences and what he's going through. And then it goes back to the throne room of heaven. And Job touches on what he's struggling to articulate here is that he is expressing and he is living in light of earthly wisdom. And that's what's happening here. But the important point of view is this here wisdom. It's that godly wisdom. The wisdom that comes through having a godly perspective of our experiences, a godly perspective of our world, a godly perspective of our futures, a godly perspective of who we are. Because that is true wisdom. Wisdom isn't found, real wisdom isn't found in what happens in this world. It really isn't found here. Wisdom comes from this perspective up here, God's perspective. And Job doesn't understand these perspectives yet. He doesn't know what's happening up here. He's trying to come to terms with it. As he's seen his reverence for God and his honor of God bubbling to the surface. And now this here chapter talking all about wisdom. There's something happening in Job. He's struggling here, where he finds that the seeds that have been germinating in his heart are starting to produce life. They're starting to produce hope. They're starting to produce maybe something that could lead to getting out of his victimhood and out of his experience. And here in his last moments, we see Job truly as the poet, Job as the philosopher, and Job as the prophet, foreshadowing even what God is going to say later on. As I said, these chapters here, 27 to 31, Job is laying down his final defense. And at the end of chapter 31, he says, let me be weighed, let my integrity be evaluated again. Again, going back to his integrity. He's held on to it all this time. He's struggled, he's struggled, he's struggled. He's fought, he's been hurt, he's been battered, but he's held on to his belief in God. Let my integrity be evaluated once again. And finally, he gets up and he says, Your Honor, the defense rests. And next time we'll go into the final words of the prosecution. We get a new voice next time. Elihu speaks up. I pray that you'll have enjoyed this and that you'll come back next time. We've only got a couple more left until we finish the book of Job. Okay? God bless. Take care.